Native Americans survived winter so harsh they could kill the unprepared in a single night. And they did it without coats, without cabins, without shelters built from stone or wood. Entire families stayed warm inside fabric teepees using methods that most of us today wouldn't even think to try. Their survival wasn't about comfort. It was about engineering the environment with whatever nature gave them. Snow turned into insulation fires carefully designed to breathe inside cloth walls, stones that stored heat through the night, and food so dense it could last for decades. These weren't random tricks. They were a system tested through centuries of brutal winters. 7 cold weather strategies that worked together to keep people alive when temperatures dropped below freezing. So how exactly did Native Americans survive winter without coats or shelters? It starts with the simple truth: survival isn't about gear, it's about knowledge. Snow kills. At 30 below, it buries cabins, cracks timber, and freezes exposed flesh in minutes. And yet Native Americans turned it into armor. The same force that claimed lives on the frontier became their shield. When storms roared across the plains, families didn't just wait it out. They carved the enemy into a wall, piling drifts waist-high around the base of their teepees. From outside, the lodge looked half-swallowed. From inside, the difference was immediate. The draft that once slipped under the hides was gone, and the air warmed just enough to matter. In that world, a few degrees decided who woke up in spring and who didn't. The secret was in the snow itself. It wasn't a block of ice, but a sponge of frozen air pockets. Pack it down, and those trapped layers of still air became insulation nature's own thermal shield. The walls forced wind to skim over the lodge instead of slicing through. Modern engineers might call it airflow control. The tribes just called it common sense. And it was work. Today we groan about shoveling a driveway. Back then the same job meant survival. Every mound thrown against the teepee bought another hour of warmth, another chance to see morning. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't high-tech. It was insulation falling from the sky, turned into a barrier by muscle and memory. We build snowmen for fun. They built snow walls so their families didn't become snowmen. Survival wasn't about conquering nature. It was about listening to it, using even the storm itself as a tool. Lighting a fire inside a fabric tent sounds insane, like cooking dinner in a house made of paper towels. One spark, and the whole thing should have gone up in flames. And yet, for Native Americans, this wasn't madness. It was survival engineering. The fire pit sat dead center, carved just shallow enough to keep sparks low, but not so deep that the heat stayed trapped at ground level. Above it, the real genius showed smoke flaps at the teepee's peak. With a tug of a pole, they could open or close depending on the wind. Combined with small vents near the bottom, they turned a simple campfire into a breathing system, cold air drawn in hot air pushed out. But this wasn't set and forget. Fire tending was a night-long job. Adults rotated in shifts, adjusting logs, watching embers, making sure the flames stayed steady. And God help the one who threw on wet wood. The moment smoke filled the teepee, the unlucky culprit probably coughed harder than the rest and earned a lifetime of teasing around the fire. Think about it. We wrestle with smart thermostats that glitch the moment Wi-Fi drops. They had no wires, no buttons, no apps. Just physics airflow and constant vigilance. And the system worked. The teepee fire wasn't just warmth. It was proof that survival doesn't demand perfect tools. It demands perfect attention. Who sleeps with rocks? To us it sounds like madness, lumpy, uncomfortable, maybe even dangerous. But for Native Americans, hot stones were the secret battery that kept families alive when the fire died. Smooth, dense stones were gathered from riverbeds or prairies, then buried deep in the teepee fire until they glowed faintly. Hours later, they were too hot to hold, but perfect for storing energy. Wrapped in buffalo hide or cloth, they were slipped under bedding or pressed against children's feet. Through the long night, long after the flames turned to ash, the stones kept releasing their stored heat, slow, steady, reliable. Physics made the trick work. Rock has what scientists call thermal mass. It absorbs heat gradually and bleeds it out just as gradually. One heating cycle could stretch across most of the night. In a world without outlets or batteries, that was enough to turn freezing hours into survivable ones. Of course, there were risks. Wrap a stone carelessly, and it could scorch your bedding or your leg. Pick a damp or brittle rock, and it might crack or even explode in the coals. Fire tenders learned quickly choose only dense, dry stones. Survival wasn't trial and error, it was discipline. Think about the contrast. Today, we plug in electric blankets or buy chemical hand warmers that last a few hours. 600 years ago, they engineered the same outcome with nothing more than rocks, hides, and patience. Sleeping with stones may sound absurd now, but in that world, they were the thin line between a warm dream and never waking up. Some survival foods barely last a season. Pemmican could last decades, sometimes longer than the people eating it. Explorers in the 1700s wrote of pemmican still edible after 30, even 40 years. Imagine a protein bar with an expiration date that outlives you. It wasn't designed for taste. It was engineered for endurance. Hunters sliced lean bison meat into strips, dried it brittle, then pounded it into powder. That meat dust was blended with rendered fat pure energy, and sometimes dried berries for a spark of flavor and vitamins. Pressed tight, it became pemmican, dense, portable, immune to spoilage. A single block carried more survival value than a pantry full of fresh meat. The genius was simple. Fat carries more than twice the calories of protein or carbs. Mixed with meat powder, it became a compact bomb of energy. 1 pound could fuel a man for days. No cooking, no hunting, no risk. In a blizzard, pemmican wasn't food. It was time, extra hours carved out of winter's grip. And it gave freedom. Hunters could travel for days without worrying about their next meal. Families could ride out storms without stepping outside. Pemmican wasn't a snack. It was strategy. It turned hunger into mobility, survival into possibility. Today, we buy Cliff Bars for a workout. Native Americans carried pemmican for migration war and winters that would kill the unprepared in hours. A Cliff Bar expires in 12 months. Pemmican might still be edible when your grandchildren are hungry. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about memory knowledge pressed into food, passed through generations, and tough enough to outlast the storms. No coats, no Gore-Tex, no insulated boots lined with synthetic fleece. To stay alive, native families had to build warmth from what they hunted, and rabbits played a starring role. Rabbit fur wasn't perfect, but it had one critical advantage: density. Those tiny, fine hairs trapped layers of still air close to the skin, turning fragile pelts into surprisingly powerful insulation. The downside: each pelt was small and tore easily, so families stitched hundreds of them together into cloaks, blankets, even crude underlayers. It wasn't pretty patchwork more than fashion, but it worked. Footwear was just as inventive. Moccasins were stuffed with dry grass or cattail fluff, creating a cushion of trapped air around the feet. In brutal cold, that natural padding could mean the difference between circulation and frostbite. Add layers of hide over the top, and you had boots tough enough to walk through snowdrifts without freezing solid. This was layering before layering was trendy. Multiple light pieces trapping air in between, exactly what modern outdoor brands advertise today. The only difference: no shiny logos, no $400 price tag, just hides, sinew, and patience. And here's the kicker layered. Right, these rabbit fur systems kept people alive in winters that would shut down modern cities. It wasn't sleek, but survival doesn't care about style points. Patagonia brags about cutting-edge insulation. Native Americans just sewed together enough rabbits to make a walking sleeping bag, and honestly, it probably worked better. Covering your skin with animal fat and fireplace ash sounds revolting, sticky gray, almost barbaric. But on the plains, it was the difference between life and frostbite. Hunters saved thick slabs of bison or deer fat, melted them down, and rubbed the grease directly onto exposed skin. It trapped body heat and blocked icy wind. Then came the twist: mixing in fine ash from the fire. The paste turned dark and gritty, coating the skin like a shield. Ash absorbed sunlight, bounced warmth back, and added another barrier against the cold. It worked because of simple physics. Fat is hydrophobic. It locks in moisture and slows the evaporation that chills skin faster in sub-zero air. Ash is carbon and minerals able to absorb and scatter heat. Combined, they made a survival cream crude foul looking, but shockingly effective. And it stuck. Unlike modern lotions that fade in hours, this greasy gray armor clung for days. Families stepped out into blizzards, literally wearing insulation on their skin. For them, it wasn't beauty, it was survival. That's the lesson hidden in the mess. Sometimes what looks disgusting is exactly what keeps you alive. Sephora sells $200 jars of winter defense cream. Native Americans smeared on campfire leftovers, and it probably worked better. Imagine stepping into a tiny hut in the middle of a blizzard, no windows, no ventilation, and someone's pouring water onto glowing red stones until the place fills with steam. To us, it sounds like a recipe for suffocation. For Native Americans, it was survival. These sweat lodges weren't about relaxation. They were low domes built from willow frames and hides sealed tight against the storm. Inside, fire-heated rocks hissed under splashes of water, and the room turned into a choking sauna. Families sat together, drenched in sweat, raising their body heat to the point where even stepping back into sub-zero air, they carried a furnace inside their chests. It was crude physiology, but brilliant warm the core before bed, and you bought hours of protection against hypothermia. Damp clothes and skin, gone evaporated in the steam. Your body walked out dry, hot, and primed to endure the night. And sure, it wasn't glamorous. No towels, no eucalyptus oil. Just steam so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Someone probably joked that it felt less like self-care and more like being cooked alive, but that was the point. Better roasted than frozen. Today, we call it a sauna and drop hundreds for memberships. For them, it wasn't a luxury. It was life insurance. A storm could rage all night, but the family who walked out of a sweat lodge carried their own fire to bed. In the end, it wasn't about comfort. It was about resilience, shared heat, and the knowledge that survival wasn't individual. It was collective. Snow walls, fire pits, hot stones, pemmican, rabbit furs, even fat and ash. None of it looked impressive, but together they formed a system. A system that turned storms into tests, not death sentences. That's the part we forget. Survival isn't about fancy gear or the latest gadget. It's about knowing how to turn what you already have. Snow rocks hides fire into lifelines. Gear runs out. Batteries die. But knowledge weighs nothing. And once you carry it, you can pass it on forever. So here's my question. Which of these hacks shocked you the most? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to see what you think. And if you want more survival wisdom tested by centuries, hit subscribe. Because the next storm, whether 600 years ago or tomorrow, is always closer than you think.